one of the things that you say, Liv, that comes to mind a lot, that I think is really interesting is the perspective that, in this time, we're all of us are sort of in a position that an injured athlete is. What do you mean by that? And how do you think about that?
Yeah. So when I talk to athletes and I hear their emotions and their feelings around losing a season or even losing a whole year of training in some cases, the emotions that I hear from them are very similar to the types of emotions you might hear from an athlete who just tore an ACL or had some other type of season-ending injury. So as I've been talking to athletes, a lot of the way that I frame the work that we're doing is actually around the way that we might frame work around an injury. Simply because, what do we know as mental performance coaches? We know the psychology behind injury. We know what might be helpful to managing those types of emotions. We don't necessarily know how to manage COVID, right? Or a global pandemic. That's not something that we frequent very often. So instead of looking at it as this unknown and this scary thing that's happening to all of these athletes, trying to look at it as, likening it to an injury. And really, like, the point of that is just to understand that right now, being an injured athlete in this sense means you can't compete, and that's what's happening. And with that comes a lot of emotion. And one of the main things that I try to help my athletes to see is that first of all, that's totally okay, right? And that's like very normal. And there's a common humanity around that. Every athlete in this country and maybe even globally in a lot of senses are dealing with this. But also to feel those emotions and not stifle them, because one of the ways we also sort of liken injuries is to the grieving process, right? There's a big loss that's happening here. And while it might not be a death, it is a loss of something very, very important to these athletes. And so the stages of grief apply here even, right? So we're going to see depression, we're going to see anger, even bargaining, right? I'll do anything if this isn't the case, right? Trying to you see all these stages happening in emotions. And if we know from psychology that if you don't allow yourself to process through those emotions, you can get stuck in one of those phases, right? Or prolong those phases. So ideally getting to acceptance, which is the last stage of the grieving process, actually can take longer if we don't allow ourselves to feel what's actually going on for us.